20. Nine, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
After a nuclear war, the whole of Europe could become a vast, uninhabitable desert. No industrial society, nothing that we would recognize as government, would survive. There would be a state of total anarchy, with all those who remained alive prey to bands of savage marauders, with disease rampant and violent death commonplace. In an all-out nuclear war, to use the word survival is idiotic.
It's back, isn't it? That fear of nuclear war that we all had when we were kids. It's back, isn't it? The tensions between the United States and North Korea is only one part of it. That's where all the news is right now. That's where all the focus is. People are testing their early warning systems again. People are talking about what they would do if it happened.
Now, there was widespread panic on the US Pacific Islands of Hawaii on Saturday over an official alert telling people to run for cover because of a ballistic missile threat, although it did turn out to be a false alarm.
And of course, where there is fear, there are mistakes. There's paranoia. Everything just seems to be getting heightened just now. And it makes me think a lot of what it was like to be a child in fear of death in a nuclear Armageddon. The reason why I work these days with nuclear weapons, I think, is because I was so afraid of them as a child. I used to have dreams very often of my family being annihilated in a nuclear strike. I would have dreams of myself alone, scrabbling for survival in a world that is beyond recognition. You have to understand that this fear was so real for me and other kids of my generation. It felt like it could and would happen, and we had no idea what we would do if it did.
What would you do if you heard a warning?
I don't know, run for it. Honestly, I don't know. I'd be totally unprepared.
Would you know what to do if you heard siren sound?
Get out of it.
What would you do?
If I was here, I'd go home and get my kids.
And what would you do then?
Drive out in the countryside somewhere. Waste of time, isn't it? Going anywhere. You've had it, ain't you? Had it, ain't you?
Would you take any preparations at all?
Well, what preparation you got? You've had it, ain't you? You've had it, ain't you? No good messing about, is it? You've had it, ain't you? No good mess crying over spilt milk, is it?
Well, what could you do? They haven't built shelters for anybody, have they? You've seen what's happened with the nuclear bomb, haven't you? The way it scatters everything, you won't stand a chance. Or you wind up with a lump in your trousers.
And so, I decided that I would get involved somehow. That's how I ended up working with nuclear weapons in a supervisory role, as if me sitting there, tapping at buttons, was going to change anything. You know, I used to think before my wife died that me sitting there in that army camp, in that Navy base, in that facility, in this country, in that country, in another, sitting there on top of those weapons, I used to think to myself, well, if I'm here, nothing bad can happen. But I slept in the same bed with my wife every single night, and she still died. So what is me sitting on top of a nuclear silo gonna do? I think perhaps nothing. This is a game review show, and I wanted to talk about a game called Fallout in this episode and devote this whole episode to Fallout. I do that because the whole reason why the Fallout franchise exists is because it's playing to people of my generation and their fear of nuclear war. And I wonder now, as we enter a new phase of nuclear fear, I wonder what we're going to be inspired to create. I wonder what we're going to be inspired to destroy. Sometimes I feel that the world is spinning into a darker place because I have recognized that I am not a good person. And I'm telling you, if you're watching this, if you're supporting my work, you're supporting a bad person. The Fallout board game from Fantasy Flight Games is a real interesting one. The first time I played it a 2-player. And we played through the game, had a good enough time, but at the end both of us said to each other, hey, that was a solid 3 out of 5, huh? That was a solid 3 out of 5, good, not great, solid, but not exceptional. But the weird thing happened. We both got in touch with each other the next day, and we'd been still thinking about the game. Because while this game has problems, it has something. It has something interesting about it in the way that it tells its story, and the freedom that it allows you to manipulate the story. And the game's pretty straightforward. You take control of a character. You travel across the map. You encounter areas. You fight enemies. Every player has their own little player board like this, where you carry your equipment and where you track your health and your radiation. If those two ever meet, by the way, you die. And this is the special board here, where you gain special attributes. They stand for stamina and perception and intelligence and so on. And you want to fill those in so that you can gain those advantages. The currency in the game is, of course, the bottle caps from the video game. Everything from a stylistic point of view, from an aesthetic point of view, is bang on. With Fallout being an RPG, leveling up had to be important in this board game. And it is, and it works, and it's one of the most enjoyable parts of the game, to be honest. When you level up, you take 2 of these tokens, flip them over, and then choose one to add to your board. And these letters are used in tests, skill tests. Let's say you're trying to encourage someone to follow you in one of the storyline quests. It may say that your test difficulty is 3 PC. So you roll 3 dice, you have to get 3 successes, and if you have a P or a C on your board, you get to re-roll twice. Once for the P, once for the C. Combat uses the same dice. When you're fighting enemies, you have to target them in specific areas, and that's cool. It's just like the VATS system in the video game. So everything is here, present and correct. This is recognizably a Fallout game. All the items are there, the NPCs are there. All the theming is right there. Even perks are in the game. You know, when I told you about flipping over the tokens to choose a letter? If you choose a letter for your board that you already have, you can choose a perk pertaining to that letter instead. And these are all one-use, incredibly powerful cards. They're really cool things to have under your belt when the game starts to get a little bit tricky. And it does get tricky. You move around the board, taking out these enemies, mutants and ghouls and irradiated insects and these nightmares, the death claws. Super strong, they hunt you across the board, but you use them to level up, and some of them are easy to take out. Other ones are more difficult. But it's all about grinding up that XP so that you can succeed really primarily at these skill tests in these quest cards. And the quest cards, man, this is why I can't stop thinking about this game. You have this big deck of numbered cards, and when you complete a quest or an encounter, and you choose from a variety of options on a card, it'll tell you to add numbered cards onto the table or into one of the encounter decks. And so the game is constantly altering its storyline as the players affect the game. And what struck me was, when I first played it, I thought, if I do these things and I learn these storylines, I mean, that's going to affect replayability, right? But all it really does is it makes you approach the game in a different way. When you know that if you hunt this synth down, or when you know that if you disbelieve this girl, that something's going to activate or something's going to happen that will affect another player, then you start to chase storylines down. You almost hunt stories across the board. It's a really interesting device. Now, I've heard a lot of talk about this game already. A lot of people are a bit concerned about how the game is scored. The game is scored using agenda cards. Basically, there's always a running storyline, an overarching story in each game. According to a scenario, there'll be a couple of factions who are vying for control. And you can choose to ally with these factions and try to advance one faction's goals ahead of another. And that's an interesting thing, because you have to keep an eye on the other player and see which quests he's completing and how he's completing them and who he's hunting down. And then you have to worry, does he have the cards that will allow him to ally with that faction? Should I be helping the other faction? And it's an interesting back and forth. This is a game, strangely, that I think is going to come into its own when you've played it a lot. And I think a lot of people are judging it on just a few plays, because it does somehow seem a little bit unsatisfying at times. Sometimes it feels like it doesn't quite work correctly. But again, the more I've played it, and I've played it solo, you know, I've hunkered down in my own little bunker here and played it solo a lot, through into the night. And I found that the more I play it, the more I like it. But then I wonder if it's maybe it's just because I do have that obsession with death right now, and waste right now, and the end of things right now. I wonder if it's that. Is it that? Or is it just that this game has a little bit of magic buried under the rubble? You just have to dig it out to appreciate it. That's why I love board games so much, is that you kind of have to dig in, experience it again and again to really appreciate it, I think. And hey, in any one game, you only see this many cards out of that whole deck. That's one full game there, and all of that's still left to explore. My wife loved this beautiful building, and she would have had her funeral here if there had been a body.
I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form